If they grow 5% this year, as it seems like they might want to, what's the LNG pull?
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that people sometimes forget is that China over the last few years has become an $18 trillion economy. So an $18 trillion economy growing at 5% is a very, very large number. In absolute terms, clearly more than a $25 trillion economy growing 2.5%. And China remains very committed to gas. It's over a 300 BCM gas market. It is committed to that becoming a 600 BCM market. And a lot of that, especially along the coast, will be served by LNG. So we're very proud.
Are you talking to China right now?
We're always talking to China. We have a number of long-term transactions with Chinese counterparties, a large breadth of counterparties, including the SOEs like PetroChina and Sinochem, and some of the next-tier players like Foran and ENN. And we're always engaged with them on long-term commitments and short-term. They're very active in that market as well.
Has the relationship between China gotten trickier over the last few years and how to sign long-term contracts when there's so much geopolitical and political tension between the two countries?
Yeah, it's tough to say that it's trickier because our initial foray into China was in the 16-17 timeframe after we started operating and after Jack joined then President Trump on a trade mission to Beijing. And that was really the big kickoff for us. We signed that initial transaction with PetroChina in early 2018. And of course, as you know, after that, trade tensions started to pick up, and it's been a tricky environment geopolitically, since we really engaged. But on the commercial side, our relationship has been great. We find solutions, we collaborate, and in fact, last year, we signed 2 more transactions with PetroChina.
Do you feel like China's going to go more with coal right now? I know that they had to, but coal's a huge ramp up. Do you feel like there's room for everything right now in China, or is there less desire for LNG versus coal?
There's room for everything in China. So China today has almost half of the world's electric vehicle fleet. Half of the cars that China will sell roughly this year will be electric, and it has been for years the single largest builder of renewables. And it's an economy that will take everything and will balance gas. It will get to its target of 15% gas as primary energy, and will, I think, is one of the countries that is most likely to meet its climate goals.
Mm-hmm. So let's go to Europe then. Have you guys signed any long-term contracts with Europe?
We, as you recall, we have a tremendous number of foundation customers that are based in Europe. Last year, we have signed additional contracts with Equinor and with Engie, and we're in discussions with a number of European players. Now, the vast majority of those long-term commitments, I think, will continue to come from the larger energy companies, the portfolio players, but we will be in discussions and are in discussions with end users as well.
There has been a lot of concern that Europe's not willing to sign long-term 15, 20-year contracts because they don't want to be in gas in 15 and 20 years. What are you seeing on the ground?
Well, just like in part with your China question, there is a very large swath of counterparties. There are clearly policy initiatives and directives that make it more challenging for some players, but others will be able to navigate that, and whether that's with 15-year commitments or 20-year commitments, I think that 23, 24 will largely rhyme with what we saw in 22. We're only about a quarter of those long-term commitments with US counterparties, us included, were done with European players. And then the rest is Asia, and a very large participation from those intermediaries that will stay committed to the LNG market for decades.
Can you gain that out for me for this year? Like, what percentage of your volumes are going to go to Europe, Asia, other parties?
Oh, sorry. Well, that's a different question. So in terms of what percentage of our volumes go to that, the vast majority of that, as you know, is administered by our long-term buyers. So we, today, we just reported our year-end results, and we said that only 70 TBTU out of almost 2,500 TBTU that we will produce is at our discretion. Really, very marginal amount of volume that the
But you have visibility, though, as to like where the off-takers are going, right?
No. They have full destination flexibility. So as soon as they buy from us, whether that is a European player, an Asian player, I mean, one of the things that tremendously helped Europe in 22 was all of those buyers in China that had less of a requirement for LNG imports because of the COVID-0 policies were able to redirect 16 million tons into the European market. So that was one of the single biggest contributors to help Europe rebalance and bring its inventories up to the required levels.
So I appreciate that you might not have the visibility as to where the ships go once they leave, but do you think we're going to see the opposite happen though? China taking those flows away from Europe?
I think that is a very large risk. China in particular, as last year the second biggest LNG market in 21, it actually surpassed Japan to become the largest LNG market. China has contracted for a lot of volume, and how China recovers post-COVID and this 5% GDP growth commitment has the ability to really impact Europe's ability to attract those marginal volumes, because those long-term contracts obviously are at economics that are far below what Europe is paying today.
Is that happening already or no?
So China has started to take additional volume. It will, we don't see it as being that sort of relief valve in 23 that it was in 22 for obvious economic reasons. Europe, on the other hand, is much better positioned today than it was in early 22 in terms of inventories, because of US LNG coming to the rescue and because of the mild winter.
There's been, we've heard that there's a lot of competition to sign longer term deals for LNG export terminals in the US because there's so many coming online. Do you feel like you're competing with your peers to get longer term contracts signed right now?
Well, it's always a competitive market.
But there's so many more projects coming online right now, and the market should be so good. So like, what are you seeing?
Well, and to add to your point, as the gas market and the LNG market recovers from these crises, the U.S. projects and U.S. economics are much more attractive. The resource base is there. The ability to construct these projects is something that the world is comfortable with. And last year was by far record year for U.S. volumes being contracted. But it is a competitive market, to your point.
More competitive now than it was before?
More competitive now than it was 3 years ago for U.S. projects. But the world, because of Arctic Russia and other projects, was quite competitive for LNG suppliers in general. So I wouldn't say that the origination team has it easy these days, but the challenges are different. And one of the great things that the Cheniere model has proved is the ability to respond to these crises, to direct volumes to the markets of most need, and to do so economically and reliably, and that is worth a lot.
Do you think we're going to be in a situation, though, where we're going to have so many projects approved and built in the U.S. that we're going to have a glut?
There's a huge gating factor to these projects, and you know, it is a long cycle business, and you know, it would be difficult to say that could never happen. But there is a lot of discipline that is impinged on a project by having to raise 10, 15, 20 billion dollars of financing. Right? A lot of other projects, liquids export terminals, import facilities that Cheniere, of course, built as well, are things that are order of magnitude, I should say, less challenging from a capital formation standpoint. That requirement to come up with that kind of money, especially in an environment that has inflationary pressures on the construction side, cost of capital pressures on the financing side, those are the challenges. Permitting is navigable. It takes marginally longer than it used to, but is something that the U.S., especially in the Gulf Coast, can do fairly well. But supplying these projects, financing these projects, is what's ultimately going to keep that competitive landscape relatively.
So it sounds like not all the projects are going to get built.
Well, certainly not all the projects are going to get built.
But like you're much more skeptical maybe than the market might assume.
Well, I would say that in 22, a number of off-takers, we believe, entered into commitments knowing that of the myriad commitments that they made, only some would come to fruition, but those off-takers are in many cases agnostic to what projects move forward. So we're very proud at Cheniere to have the operating history that has literally delivered on every single one of our foundation customer cargoes since inception. The market appreciates that and understands that in our 7 years of operating, that is quite an honor to be able to support our customers that way. And lots of other projects, as you know, have had their slate of challenges.
That's really interesting that they like cast a wide net.
Absolutely.
knowing that all the nets won't catch the fish.
Absolutely, absolutely. And developing projects up to the point where you're able to market a project to customers is relatively a lot less challenging than, of course, actually delivering LNG ultimately.
Two quick questions. For Sabine Pass, the expansion that you guys are doing, have you started long-term conversations for contracts?
Of course.
How are they going?
They're going quite well. We had a terrific year last year, as you can imagine. We have fully contracted our Corpus expansion and the additional capacity that we are in the pre-filing process for at Corpus. So in the second half of the year, the conversations pivoted to what's next. Now that we've unveiled the pre-filing for Sabine Pass, those conversations are stepping up in terms of intensity.
Do you give me insight as to who those contract players
I actually, absolutely, I will in fact list the top 5 for you. Jokes aside, I think it'll very much rhyme with what we saw in 22. A lot of interest from large international portfolio players, a lot of Asian end user demand, and some end users in Europe here and there, but they will make up the minority of that offtake pool.
Last question I'm asking everybody. What's going to drive my car in 10 years?
I think there's a very high likelihood. Look, in China, it'll be very difficult. China announced a couple of weeks ago that it believes it reached peak gasoline demand. And I think the overwhelming odds are that your personal vehicle will be electric. If you have a dually that you need to take to the ranch, that'll still likely be diesel. But your personal sort of in-town vehicle, overwhelming odds that that's electric.